and then I'm going to put everyone on mute, but you can unmute yourself whenever you wish, and we'll start off on our first virtual tour 2024. And this, to many people, may be an unusual choice, but I was determined to visit Old Aberdeen for a variety of reasons, because over the last 2 years, I've spent a lot of time with small tour groups, particularly from the US, in Old Aberdeen, and mainly because the tour operator thinks it's a good base for exploring the area around the city with plenty of hotel rooms. But it often comes as a surprise to my overseas visitors who think that Aberdeen is just an industrial city that was made rich with the oil and gas boom from the 1970s, that it doesn't have much history. And they are so wrong, because Aberdeen is really two different cities. We have the modern city of today, made, as I said, rich from oil and gas out in the North Sea, although it goes through hard times whenever the oil price plummets, as it has over the last decade. And you can see that in the modern parts of the city. But hidden away in the northern quarter of the city is the old medieval quarter that up until the late 1800s was a completely different town from the rest of what is now the city, and they were fiercely independent until 1899, when they were merged to form what is now the city of Aberdeen. And we are going to look around that old medieval quarter and see what makes it so special. So I think we'll head off. Anyone who is new with me will know that I am obsessed with maps, and I always start a tour with a map so that you can get your bearings. There's Aberdeen, blue up in the right-hand corner, not as far north as Inverness, but much further north than Glasgow and our capital city, Edinburgh. So it's up in the northeast corner of Scotland, and we're zooming in now. You can see the city, the whole city coming into view now, stuck in between two rivers. And Old Aberdeen was formed near the Northern River, which is called the River of Don. And really the center of it is this quadrant, King's College, which is the university quarter. And to many extents, Old Aberdeen grew up around this university, the original university buildings of King's College, and the cathedral, which is a little bit further north at the end of the main road through the town. And we're going to head there towards the end of our tour this evening. So we'll fly through and start where we mean to begin, which is outside the entrance of King's College, Aberdeen. But I'm not going to linger there initially. I am going to move on a little bit away from the entrance of King's College, just 100 yards further south, I suppose, along this main street. If you can see my arrow on the screen running down sort of almost center, there's a road north to south, and that is Old Aberdeen. And we're going to take a look at these rather impressive and peculiar gates. And you can see through the gates a more modern building, although it's still around 150 years old. For many students, this is the entryway to their halls of residence, so the places that they stay during their university years, which is a whole complex of modern buildings that are sort of hidden behind the wall, but they enter through these rather impressive gates, which are called the Powis gates. So that's Powis, and they were erected in the 1830s by a man called John Leslie of Powis. And before this side of the old town was developed, he had built a huge mansion, which is now, as it happens, a community centre um, um, on the other side of these gates. So can you see this is he's the remnants of his original house that he built and now being turned into a community centre on a more modern housing estate. And the gates, let's go back to the gates there. They are the gates. That was the entry place to his grand country estate. So if you can see my arrow over the top of an eye there, that's where the gates are. And he would have had a grand driveway up to his house, which stands where my arrow is pointing now, just below this set of playing fields. So we'll just close the gates a second and have a closer look at this house. And the Leslie family were rich merchants in Aberdeen, enabling them to buy this piece of land by the old medieval town and to build a rather grand mansion house and have a large estate with it, and also to build these rather out of character gates that don't seem to fit in anywhere else, with the rather peculiar towers to them as well. The minarets with the little like castellated bits around it. And if we head in a little bit there, this is a recurring theme which often confuses people. Can you see the crescent at the top, on top of the wind dial there? Well, there are crescents all around this gate on either side of it if you look really carefully. And that's led to lots of people saying, ah, that's the crescent. That means it has a Turkish connection. Did the Leslies travel to Turkey, or were they merchants in Turkey? And what's the significance of these crescents? And some people say, oh, well, one of the reasons is because John Leslie, who built the house and the estate, he had in the original house, now long gone, was a huge portrait that stood above his mantelpiece, and it was him dressed in a Turkish costume. Now, we have written accounts of this portrait, but the portrait has disappeared, and we have no images of the portrait. So could that possibly be the reason that there's so many crescents on this particular tower? Well, I'm going to disappoint you, because that is not the reason. There's a far more simpler reason. Is the crescent appears on the clan crest of quite an important clan here in the Scottish Highlands, which is Clan Fraser. And the Leslie family and the Fraser family in the late 1700s and early 1800s actually are married, and their families joined, and so their new coat of arms included crescents on it. That quite often happened with coats of arms when two different families joined. They sort of amalgamated the two coats of arms together. So hence, that's why there are so many crescents, although I quite like the romantic notion of it having a Turkish connection instead. And although I said he was a merchant, it certainly wasn't in Turkey, because this is a new sign that has reappeared in recent years as here in Britain and elsewhere in the world, we've sort of been reassessing our history, and in particular, our history linked to the slave trade. And although many people, many political activists have been campaigning for the removal of statues of people that profited from the slave trade, others are more circumspect and more realistic and say, well, we can't go around removing every statue or every university building or a marvelous gates like the Paris gates, because there would be very little left of our more recent history here in the United Kingdom, but we can recognize it and we can put up appropriate explanations, um, and leave people to make their minds up about the links with the slave trade and what impact it had on our society. It's been particularly difficult here in Scotland because as a nation, we never really acknowledged links to the slave trade, preferring to blame the English because slaves were physically traded through London and Bristol and Liverpool in England, and no slaves were actually traded here in Scotland. But that doesn't mean we didn't profit from the slave trade, as we can see from this sign, because we relied on slave labor in the West Indies and in the plantations in pre-independence America as well, the tobacco and sugar plantations, which we profited from. So that's just, as I say, a more recent sign that has appeared, and I thought it would be worthwhile sharing that with you. And now we will head back to where we were at the beginning of the tour, which was outside King's College, which is the old sort of university quarter in Old Aberdeen. And I thought, if everything goes right, we would actually try walking. Hopefully you can see a video. And we're actually wondering, I see Celia smiling, so I assume that you can see the moving. So I'm actually moving through the main gates of King's College, established in 1496. It's the fifth oldest university in the United Kingdom. So that makes it a really important education establishment. And we've walked into the quad here, walking past this no, it's not octagonal, hexagonal shape on the left-hand side, which is the well. And we're walking towards the main centre with two statues on either side, which we will take a closer look at shortly. And I'm swinging round now on a rather wet day, as you can see by that man wandering past, and so that you can get a look at the well here, which is not a spring, interestingly, and I'll tell you why in a second. And then we're looking up at the main tower. Can you see it looks a bit like a crown? That's above the college chapel. We're going to just swing round so you can see the rest of the building. So the college chapel is the oldest part. You wouldn't know it, but this is the newest part. This is about 150 years old instead of over 500 years old. And then we swing back round. We're seeing the chapel coming back in to sight. And we end up with a view of the chapel bell tower there. But now, before I start talking about the bell tower in more detail, I said that I was going to mention that well, and that it was interesting that it wasn't fed from a spring or a borehole. In fact, the well had disappeared. It had been built over and was only rediscovered, I don't know, maybe in the 1930s, when they decided to lay out that lawn that we saw on the various paths. And when they discovered it, they found that it wasn't very deep at all. And the reason is that the water table is quite high and remains quite high here. And that's part of the reason that Bishop Alfriston, who was a really important man in medieval Scotland, he was the Chancellor of Scotland, which meant he was the next most important person after the king. He was the king's chief minister, which made him an extremely powerful man. And he was also a bishop. And he traveled to Rome to convince the Pope, because back in the 14 and 1500s, to establish a university in the Catholic worshipping world, which Scotland was part of, you needed permission of the Pope. And so he went on a long pilgrimage to Rome to convince the Pope to create a university in the very far north of Scotland. So we had already had a university in St Andrews, and we also already had a university in Edinburgh. But Bishop Alphonston went up to across to Rome, and he told the Pope that we needed to educate the wild and barbarous people of Aberdeen, which doesn't suggest that he thought too much of the people of north east of Scotland. And that's actually written in the petition that the king then, James the Fourth, sent to the Pope. But it was actually more about that. Both the bishop and the king realized that there was a lack of professional people in the northeast of Scotland and the Highlands. The professionals uh, worked and lived and studied and thought in the central belt of Scotland, and this northeast, although it was populated, was lacking that. And so this was their way of addressing it. But why was it built here if the water table is really, really high from that well? Well, there's one simple reason. It's an area of flat land around Aberdeen, but it was very marshy and boggy, which meant it was cheap to buy. And that's the only reason. It was all down, a very Scottish thing. We have a reputation in Scotland as being penny pinchers. And this is an early example of it, obviously, that if you can save a few Scots pounds by building on really awful land that no one else wants to build on, well, it's a perfect place for a university. But it must have cost an enormous amount of money to build it, because they had a hammer oak staves into the ground to form the foundations. And in essence, the college that we see here today, which is really impressive, is floating on top of it, which is rather scary when you think about that. And once it was established, teaching commenced soon after, even though the main college that we see here wasn't completed. And it was the third university in Scotland. And more importantly, it was the first university in Scotland to have a medical school, which was really unusual. And today, it remains the best. Last year, it was rated the best medical school in the United Kingdom and the best for the study of anatomy and physiology. And it remains one of the best universities in the country for the other subject, which it was founded upon. So it was founded upon medicine and theology. And many clergymen and women here in Scotland come to Aberdeen University to take their theology degrees before entering the ministry. So that's a bit of the background to the university. We're going to move on now. So I come outside the quad and I'm going to go in another entrance now. This is my preferred entrance. You can go through the grand entrance, but maybe I live in the shadows or something. I don't know. But I prefer going in through the tradesman's entrance or the student's entrance, which is round the back. So we've come right round the back. We've got a fantastic view of the Crown Tower, and then we've got the whole length of the chapel with the arched stained glass windows along the chapel, and we'll head in to the chapel in due course. But first of all, if the video works fine, we're going to head in through this back door, through this gap between the two buildings. So the building on the left dates from the early 1600s. It was actually student accommodation and was cutting edge at the time because no one had thought about building multi-story buildings. So it's 6 stories high when it was built. And then again, that was to save money as well. And the reason I came in this way is because we get a really good look of these two creatures that I thought I would just spend a couple of minutes telling you about. So we have two creatures. I'm gonna, let's see if we can put them up on the screen. 1 second. Where have they gone? Aha. So we'll put up the first one, which is a unicorn. And the unicorn is holding the flag of Scotland in its hooves. So this is the St Andrew's cross, or the Scottish saltire. And next to him is the Lion of England, and he's holding the cross of St George, which is the flag of St George and the flag of the English nation. And the reason we have both Scotland and England here is that these were probably erected after 1707, when our two nations joined and formed the United Kingdom, and the coat of arms of the United Kingdom involve a unicorn on one side and a lion on the other. If you didn't know this, Scotland is the only country in the world, the only nation in the world that has a mythical being as its national animal. So the unicorn is our national animal, not a golden eagle, not a haggis, not a sheep, which you see plenty of, but a unicorn, which is a mythical creature. And there's lots of reasons as to that, the reason for that. But the main reason is that it was an early symbol of our ancient kings. Somewhere back in the 1200s, Scottish king, some think it was William the Lion, adopted the unicorn. Well, if William the Lion adopted the unicorn, why didn't he choose a lion if he was called William the Lion? Well, for a simple reason. The English kings had already laid claim to the lion as the creature that represented England, the fierce, unbeatable lion. Or is he? Because Scotland chose a unicorn, which in mythology is the only creature that can defeat a lion. So was that, sort of the Scots going, no, 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 to the English, that we're far superior to you, and don't get too big for your boots because we've got a way of counteracting you. We are unicorns. And also, the unicorn was a symbol of purity and many other things that the Scottish kings wanted to associate themselves with. Now, many people, if you look, you can see round its neck is a crown. If you look very carefully, it's a crown with a chain tethering it to the ground. Now, many people say that is a result of the English, and that's the English tethering the Scottish unicorn and taming it. And particularly nationalist politicians like to say that. It's not true, or at least we don't think so. We actually think it's an indication of, because the unicorn was such an untamable beast, it was the Scottish king saying, look, I am so powerful, and more importantly, so pure, because only someone pure of heart could tame a unicorn, that I am able to tame a unicorn on behalf of the Scottish nation. And that is why on the Scottish royal coat of arms, which I put up here, which this coat of arms is on the wall outside the college chapel, you will see the unicorns there. We have two unicorns on either side, and the royal coat of arms, which King Charles has today, will have a lion on one side and a unicorn on the other side, signifying that he is king of both England and of Scotland as part of the United Kingdom. So I hope that you found out a bit about our mysterious unicorn beast there. And I'm just going to take a sip of beer. And we'll think a bit more about the college. And I quite like this photo. So you can see all these coats of arms along the chapel wall, including in the middle. The one that I just showed you of the Scottish king, that was King James IV. His coat of arms is there because it was he who that established it way back in 1495 with Bishop Alfonston. And that is why it's called the King's College. Today, what, about 14,000 students in the University of Aberdeen. Did you know that at one time, up until when was it? Up until 1826, Aberdeen had as many universities as England. Now that's quite surprising. I can see Celia amazed at that. Yet it had as many universities as England, because England at that stage only had Oxford University and Cambridge University, whereas Aberdeen had King's College University, and in the new city down the road had something called Marshall College University. And then in 1826, the two of them merged to form the University of Aberdeen, which is what we have today. And as I said, around about 14,000 students with over 130 nationalities. So it's truly a global university. And the reason it has this crown is to indicate the fact that it had the patronage of the king. But I just wanted to tell you something very quickly about the crown, because quite often you see a crown which is an open crown, so it wraps around my head with bits pointing up. And that's not like this one. This is what is called an imperial crown, so it is closed in. And this is very important symbolically, because an imperial crown, when displayed in medieval history, indicates that there is no one above that king other than God himself. And that meant that the Holy Roman Emperor, the head of the Catholic Church, was an equal with the Scottish king. And that was the Scottish king saying to all of the other kings in Europe that I don't bow down to anyone else. I don't bow down to the Holy Roman Emperor. The only person I bow down to with my imperial crown upon my head is God himself. And so that's why this closed crown, this imperial crown, is so important. This isn't the original, by the way. Celia, before we started, was talking about Oklahoma and hurricanes and tornadoes. Well, if one of those swept through Old Aberdeen, I'm sure it will knock this crown off. We don't get any tornadoes or hurricanes in Old Aberdeen, but a storm in 1633 caused this tower to collapse. And so this is a replacement that a couple of years later to replace the original one that was blown down in that wild storm. Anyway, I'm talking too much or lingering, and I think we need to head inside the chapel, because I've mentioned it so many times. And so we've got quite a good view. I'm stood at the altar here, or just before the altar, just above what we would call the communion rail. And it's maybe not what you expected from the old look outside. And I can understand that, but it is an important chapel. And so this dates back to what, the late 1400s. And you wouldn't know that from all the modern chairs laid out here. And you can see it's quite plain. It's white with a big modern organ. But if you look up to the roof, we've got this barrel vaulted ceiling, which is medieval. And then we've got the original choir stalls. So the dark wood lit up by all these lamps is where the choir still sits today, and the senior clergy still sits today for each of the services. And these are original. These are medieval, and they are said to be some of the finest, well, the most complete wooden interior of any church in Scotland since the Reformation. So the Reformation was 1562, where overnight we changed from being a Catholic nation to a Protestant nation. And any vestiges, all the brightly painted chapels, the gold, the statues that were left over from the Catholic Church were removed. And quite often wooden interiors like this one were also removed and lost forever. So it is absolutely fantastic that we still have this incredible wooden interior within the chapel. So the chapel, you wouldn't know it from this particular angle, apparently seats up to 300 people. And it's where the students retreated in the mid-1600s during what in essence was a religious war between people called the Covenanters, who wanted a very particular style of worship, and the more traditional worshippers that would have worshipped and would have been almost Catholic in many ways. They laid siege on the chapel, and the rector of the university armed the students with swords and pickaxes, and they beat away their attackers. And I suspect if the attackers had got in, they would have stripped away what was left of the choir, and we wouldn't get to enjoy it today. And I'm stood just in front of this huge block of granite. Aberdeen's very famous for granite. It's often known as the Granite City. Most of the buildings are built of granite because it's so much of it in the area, and so much of it was quarried. And this is marks the tomb of Bishop Alphonston, the founder of the university. His body no longer lays here. His body, his bones disappeared sometime during the Reformation because he was seen as a Catholic and very simple. And also tombs like this were frowned upon by the Protestant church. And a much more elaborate tomb, which had a canopy over it, was destroyed as a result. This is a more modern tomb, but it's not complete. And we will find out why when we get outside. But it marks the spot of where Bishop Alphonston was originally buried. And I think we will perhaps have a closer look at the choir stalls here. So here am I, sat where the choir, the college choir, will sit. And you're getting a good view of this lovely dark wood and delicately carved, delicate trace work as well. And we can have a closer look at that. You can see how delicate it is and how rich and opulent this chapel must have been when it was first built, and when, if you like, when it was first complete. And then we'll have a look at the choir stalls as well. So this dark Scottish oak with, I'm not sure what that is. Is it maybe pomegranate that's meant to represent, which is quite often mentioned or quite often seen in church buildings. This is one of the choir stalls. And you can, there isn't a church service in the cottage chapel every day these days, whereas there would have been when the students first enrolled here. I love this little fact. So when the university was built in 1495, or when it opened a few years later, they built a huge wall around the whole university complex so that the students couldn't see out, and so that they couldn't be tempted by all the unruly activity and drunkenness and sloppiness elsewhere in the old town. And they were expected to attend chapel every day, but not just every day, 7 times a day. I'm not sure how they had any time to study if they were constantly having to head off to the chapel to pray and to listen to the word of God. And we'll have, and this is one of my favorite parts of the chapel. So at the end of the choir stalls, we have these wonderful carvings, and this is a close-up of a wonderful lion, and he's holding a shield with another lion on, and that's the lion rampant of Scotland, which is another symbol of the Scottish monarchy that was adopted quite early on. And on an alternative flag of Scotland, you quite often see a yellow flag with a red lion, and the red lion is rampant like this, and that is also a symbol of Scottish independence and Scottish nationhood. And I thought you might want, I'm hoping this will work. Hopefully, if I press the button in a moment, you should hear some sound. And this is actually a recording from inside the chapel by the chapel choir. And I thought we'd listen to that as we head out of the chapel, and I can rest my voice for a bit. So hopefully. Now, can you hear any music? Because I can't hear any. Ah. Ha ha ha. Technology has obviously got the better of me. No. Oh, what a shame. Don't worry. I will. In the next couple of days after this, when I send out the link to the recording, you will also have a link to this a piece of music as well. Um, oh, that is a real shame. You know, it worked so many times today when I was trying it out. I've obviously pressed some wrong button somewhere. So we'll head outside instead. And I told you about that tomb. I told you about that tomb of Bishop Alfonston, and that it wasn't complete. And the reason being is most of it is outside. So this was, I told you that his original grand tomb with a canopy was removed and or destroyed. And the college, the university decided that they wanted to recognize their founder and rebuild a new tomb to a new design. And this is it. And the reason it is outside is, imagine this on top of that huge piece of granite that we saw inside, in front of the altar. It was too big, and people complained, particularly during wedding services, that the bride and groom couldn't stand next to each other, or if they would stood next to each other, they were virtually cuddling each other, which is fine, I guess, for a wedding, but it was just too big and too in the way. So eventually, the top half was removed outside, and it stands outside the entrance of the university, as we can see here. And I thought you'd like to see some close-ups of how ornate it is. So these are at Bishop Alfredston's head. And let me double check. So those are. I've lost my notes that tells me. So these are angels. So he has two angels standing at his head. And then you can see on the main photo in the middle, he has two servants standing at his feet. And then I think I've got one of the bishop himself laid down in all his finery. So this is made from bronze and marble. And it was commissioned by a then famous sculptor called Harry Wilson. And originally, he wanted to recreate the whole tomb, including the canopy, but it was too expensive. And he constantly asked the commissioning committee for more time and money. He was hopelessly behind schedule. And then World War One got in the way. And he had a studio in Venice where he was making this. And to avoid this being melted down by enemy troops and then used to make weapons, he actually threw it into a canal in Venice to hide it. And it was only recovered after World War One finished, and eventually came here in the mid to late 1920s, and as I said, originally in the chapel itself until it was removed outside. Oh, I'm overrunning so much. I do apologize. But I'm sure if you're happy, I'm more than happy to continue after 9 o'clock rather than limit it to an hour. Another view here, and I thought we've got all these medieval buildings. We've got a medieval style tomb. I thought I would bring you to a more modern piece. This rather louch chap who I quite like. And he's called the man with the split apple, which is a fantastic title. So here I am looking at the back of his head. Now, although he has the title, the man with the split apple, it won't surprise you that students have a rather different uh, title for this, which is rather remnant to the tomb of Bishop Alphonston, because they actually call it the tomb of the unknown student, which is a very studenty thing to say. But as you will see, it has a split apple in one hand. And if I go around the other side to show you a length-long view of him, his hand with his apple is just by he's in his open right hand, which is just by his right leg. And this sits outside the new college of Old Aberdeen, which you can see just over the youth's head in the background. And it's said to represent all sorts of things that the sculptor says that it represents that you can relax and also study, and that it's important during your studying time to have a leisure as well. He's got an apple because that's meant to be the apple of knowledge. Also has Christian symbolism as well. Has he been tempted by an apple like Eve was in the Garden of Eden? Tempted away from his studies? Who knows? We can but speculate, but that is a rather fine statue within the medieval quarter. And where are we now? What we're going to look at next? Aha! We're going to head out of the courtyard and we're going to head down Old Aberdeen itself. So we're looking back towards the chapel there. And then you can see it's sort of cobbled lanes. And we're walking further along the high street, and we've got these little lanes with houses alongside them, and some of them are quite mysterious lanes that sort of tempt you to different places. I don't know if you can see, but right at the very end of this lane, you've got like it almost looks like a gate on my photo, but there's some sort of strange structure leading your eye along the way that doesn't quite seem right for where we are. So let's have a look at what was there. So if I was to walk along that lane and come out, this is the building that appears. And I can see a bit of surprise on some of your faces that a big cube of steel and glass has suddenly appeared with this almost like zebra pattern on it. And this is the new university library. And you may think, it spoils the area or dominates the area. It certainly dominates the skyline when you're out of Old Aberdeen, and you get glimpses of it around the old town. But do you know, even though I'm not necessarily a big fan of modern architecture, in its place, it does work. And it has space for 1,400 students at any one time to study in here. It has an amazing I can't remember how many miles of shelving within it. It has something like 8,000 um, pieces of white and clear glass, and that means that it always looks really, really different, where either when it's clouded over or on a sunny day like this, and when the sun strikes it, it looks really, really interesting and sort of scintillating. It was opened by the Queen in 2012, and it is named after a former principal of the university, and it holds really important records for the university. It's something like 250,000 ancient or medieval books and manuscripts within a purpose-built archive within the building. And I thought we'd have a look at it from different angles. So it's got a variety of sculptures outside, including uh, this peculiar one, which is said to represent a famous boat called the Thermopylae, which was built in Aberdeen harbour, and at its time was the fastest boat in the world. And then we have this peculiar sculpture, piece of modern sculpture. This was gifted to the university by a professor or a doctor, I think, and there was a public competition to name it. And one of the professors actually came up with the name, which is Evolutionary Loop 561, which doesn't make a lot of sense until you check what he was talking about. And he was saying the reason he came up with it was it represents the evolution that every student, member of staff, teaching staff go through during their time at Aberdeen, and the 561 represents how old the university was when it was unveiled. So there you are. I'm sure it's 561. Convinced it's 561. Evolutionary loop 561. So there's a bit of modern with the old. We'll glance back along that medieval street, and I think we'll head on along the road now, where we have a view of a rather fine Georgian building. So we've had medieval. We're heading along the high street now to a rather fine building. What is fantastic about Old Aberdeen is the university authorities were determined that it should remain like a village. There was a time when they owned all of the buildings and they helped restore them in the 50s, 60s, and 70s with various charitable grants. Then they fell on hard times during the 1980s and they sold them all off, or many of them all off. And then they decided to move out the city centre and back to the old town. And over the years, they have brought many of them back into university ownership. And so it does feel very much like a village still. And here we have not a village hall, but a symbol that the fact that Aberdeen or Old Aberdeen or the Old Town, or the Alton, as it is quite often known, was actually a very prosperous and powerful place, because this is the old townhouse built of Aberdeen granite, big, solid, important building. And to have a townhouse signified that you were prosperous. This is where the town councillors would meet. There was a prison within there at one time. There was a magistrate's court. I think the town fire engine was kept in there at one time. If I took you around the right-hand side, you can still see the wooden doors where the fire engine was kept. But can you see in front of it is like this column, which also indicates something very important in terms of the power of Old Aberdeen. So we've got a close-up of it there. Doesn't look very important these days, mainly because most of it is a replica, and the oldest bit of it is right at the very top. that knuckle on the top. This is the Mercat cross, or the market cross. And to have a market in medieval times, you needed the permission of the king, who would give you a market charter. And it meant that the town could have a market, it could trade, it could levy taxes, it could set the trading standards for the town merchants. And that's what made Old Aberdeen so prosperous. This was lost for a long time, and then that bit at the top, which is the only remaining part of the original market cross that we are aware of, I think was found in a blacksmith's yard a little way away from me. I'm pretty sure it was a blacksmith's, and then it was put on top. Much of it was defaced during the Reformation. So on one side it had an image of the Virgin Mary, and of course that was unacceptable in a Protestant nation. So this is really all that we have left of it, but an important symbol of Aberdeen's prosperity and independence. We're going to head further along, leaving the university bit behind. We've left the merchant bit behind. We've crossed over the road and we're heading towards the cathedral. And this long road is called the Chanonry, and it's one of my favourite parts of the old city. This is where the clergymen of the cathedral, the canons of the cathedral, once lived. And they had their manses all along this road. And each of their manses were named after the parish where they were ministers. Now, most of those have now gone, and most of those original manses have disappeared, but the land upon which they were built remains, and you can see they are really big plots with more modern with Georgian houses, so dating from the mid 1700s onwards there, and quite often these are associated with particular teaching posts within the university. The vice principal, so the person that's in charge of all the university and the administration, lives in one of these houses just down the end of this street, and that comes with the job. That can be controversial because from time to time these need refurbishing, cost a large amount of money, and students say, well, you're cutting back on our university teaching, but you're quite prepared to spend money on refurbishing a lecturer's house. When these do come up on the open market, I think the last one I saw was £1.4 million, which actually, probably for what it is probably pretty good, because it would be double that if it was in Edinburgh. So we're heading to the university called St. Macca's. Now, St. Macca was a disciple of a man called Columba, who brought Christianity to Scotland. And Columba told St. Macca, or Macca as he was then, to go and found a monastery on the north of Scotland, where he found a river that formed a bishop's crozier. So this is where he came. Can you see the river? Can you see the bishop's crozier? Not easy to see. So let's see if I can show you a way of... What if I turn it around and mark it there? Can you see the loop at the top and then the staff running down to the sea at the bottom, forming a bishop's crozier? Fanciful, or how would he have known it was a crozier without a satellite image and without wings or an aeroplane? Maybe he was able to work it out from the lay of the land. So this is where he built his cathedral. Some suggest that Columba sent him on such a long, hazardous journey because he was jealous of Macca and his healing skills, because he was known for miracles of healing. Surely our early churchmen weren't that jealous of each other or competitive, or were they? But this is where he came. So you can see with the red marker at the bottom of the screen, that's where St. Macca's Cathedral stands now. So there's probably been a religious community here since the mid to late 1600s, when Macca came this way. His cathedral's long gone, with a granite cathedral in its place, which we will take a look at, built from the 1200s onwards, and let's have a walk through the cathedral grounds. Now, I have a guilty secret. I am called a taphophile, which means a lover of graveyards, and I find them fascinating. And this is one of the most impressive graveyards connected to a cathedral. And we'll head in to the cathedral through this entrance here. And the video stops there because that guy coming out happens to be a friend of mine who's a fellow guide. And I was rather taken by surprise when he suddenly appeared. He was getting ready for a busy season, and he thought he'd head into the cathedral to refresh his memory. But once you walk through those doors, you have a rather surprising building. For any of you that have been to cathedrals elsewhere in the UK or in Europe, it's quite plain. But that's the Scottish style, because this was a Catholic cathedral originally. It would have been highly decorated, painted. The stonework would have been whitewashed and painted with gold and gold gilt, and there would have been statues. Every window would have been made of stained glass. But of course, that was all torn out during the Reformation. And we have a very plain style of worship space to this day, but a very light and airy one, which is quite unusual, I think, in certainly in northern Scotland. And of course, is it really a cathedral? Because it is part of the Church of Scotland, the Protestant faith predominant in Scotland, and the Church of Scotland do not have bishops. And a cathedral can only exist if it is the seat of a bishop. So can it call itself a cathedral? Well, technically no, but by convention, those churches in the care of the Church of Scotland that were once cathedrals, like this one here, and St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh, are still referred to as cathedrals, and they are grand buildings as a result. So I'm looking down from a gallery down towards what would have been the altar, now the communion table, the stained glass window, and look up above a rather interesting roof, which is the original medieval roof. And I think we'll take a closer look at that, because all the way along that roof, we have a rows of these shields. And this is like, I don't know, like Facebook, like Instagram, like Twitter. This was like the social media of the medieval age, because this was all about sending out a message. Sending out a message that Aberdeen was wealthy enough to have a wooden ceiling like this, but also about its significance. So we have three columns that run the entire length of the church. On the right-hand side, we have the shields of Scottish kings and queens. So you can see there's a crown over each of those. And in the middle, we have the shields of important bishops or clergymen associated with the cathedral. And the very far one, which I haven't got a photo of here, is the shield of the Pope at the time of the establishment of the cathedral. And I'm astonished that that remained after the Reformation and wasn't removed, because anything to do with the Pope was a big no-no. Obviously, John Knox didn't know it was there. Otherwise, he would have ordered its removal. And then on the left-hand side, we have the coats of arms of various dignitaries and powerful families also associated with the cathedral. This is an amazing ceiling, quite incredible. Quite often, I'm tempted to go in and just lay on the floor and gaze up, but I wonder if people might give me a rather odd look if I did such a thing. And other than the amazing ceiling, there's a few other things that I wanted to show you, not least of all this interesting cross, because this dates back probably to around 900 AD, and it is a symbol of an important part of Scottish history that is now almost forgotten because we know so little about it. This top piece that I have focused on is what remains of a Pictish cross. So I've got a close-up cutout of it so you can see it in detail. And the Picts were the predominant people that dominated Scotland from about 600 to 900 AD, but we know so little about them. They disappeared off the historical record, probably assimilated into the Gaels that swept in from Ireland, that brought their culture and their language of Gaelic and then spread across Scotland. But it's interesting that we've got a bit of Christian symbology from the Pictish people, and this is a rather fine example of it. The whole of the Aberdeenshire area, the northeast of Scotland, was the powerhouse for the Picts, and still today we have lots of their standing stones with carvings on it, and archaeologists spend a lot of time trying to decipher what they mean. Now, what are we having a look at here, I wonder? Ah, I know. Of course, we've headed into a cathedral. There must be some stained glass there. Now, unfortunately, none of the original stained glass from when the cathedral was built remains, because that would have all been torn out and replaced with clear glass. But over time, new stained glass has been commissioned, and we have some fine examples. This one is of the founding bishops. So we have a Bishop Cunmundan on the left, Bishop Lichten in the middle, and Bishop Alfriston in the middle, Bishop Lichten on the right. And if you look very carefully up the top, we actually have some examples of what the cathedral would have looked like when it was built, up in those very top windows. And I like the fact that they remain there. Let's see if I can get another stained glass window up. So this is a very different style. This is by a man called Cottier, and this is from the early 1900s, and it's the style of arts and crafts which swept across much of Britain at the time. Very fashionable and very sort of romantic styling. And here, I believe we have three virtues. We have Faith on the left-hand side. I think she's holding a chalice in her hand. And then we have Charity in the middle. And then we have Hope, the anchor of hope she's holding on the right-hand side. But although I like both of those stained glass windows, they're not actually my favorite in this building. There is some others that I far prefer. Let's see if I can find those. Here it is. So this is called the War Memorial window. The slab of marble beneath it has the names of those that lost their lives from the cathedral district during World War One. And this was quite common in churches, that you have a memorial like this with a specially commissioned stained glass window above it. And this is a rather fine example. And let's see if I can get a closer up here. So this is St. Michael killing the dragon. And so this represents the triumph of good over evil during World War One. A really striking and a really striking depiction of this beast below. But there's something else which is really small, and so I've got a close-up of it of what I really like about this is right at the bottom of this stained glass window is this little section here where you've got the bridges of Aberdeen, the two bridges, the Bridge of Don and the Bridge of Balgownie, sorry, the two bridges of Old Aberdeen, just below this creature's head. Can you see them with the River Don flowing through? And then we've got the North Sea right at the bottom with two battleships sailing on them. You've got a battleship coming in from the right-hand side, and then you've got a battleship right down on the bottom as well. I think that's wonderful in a piece of stained glass in a church that we've got this sort of incredible detail. I wonder how many people just wander past and don't particularly notice those items there. I think that's fantastic and so clever of the designer, the artist, to encompass those within that stained glass window. And I think we will move on. Got a few more things to see because I realise I took you straight into the cathedral through the graveyard without actually seeing the cathedral itself. So I thought we'd just nip outside to see what the cathedral looks like. Now, as you can see, it's maybe not what you would think as grand as so Gothic or Norman cathedral that you might see in England, like Canterbury. But the cathedral is not in its entirety. It's only half of it that's left, which is this half. To the right of this picture would have been a huge tower with bells in it, which was built by Bishop Alphonston. But that was destroyed, and it was a result of a man called Oliver Cromwell and his troops in the 1600s, who swept into Scotland, subjugated it, and they took away stone from the then roofless cathedral that had been abandoned, and all the lead had been stripped away by order of the government during the Reformation. All the statues had been stripped away, and they were going to sell them in Holland. But God got his revenge because the boat that was taking all this lead and all the precious items sunk just as it left Aberdeen Harbour. So that was divine retribution, if you like. But the building was so neglected, Cromwell's troops came along, took the stone to build a fort, a citadel in the centre of the new Aberdeen, and as a result, the central tower collapsed, and that part of the cathedral, was never rebuilt. Sorry, I was getting carried away then. And I've gone round the end to the main entrance of the church, which is peculiar because it doesn't look so much like a cathedral. It almost looks, do you think it almost looks military in style? You see the steeples, and then you've got these square towers beneath them that also that are sort of castellated. They almost look fort-like, and that was deliberate. The designer deliberately did that because it was almost built as a fortress during a time of upheaval, and it probably needed to withstand attack. So that was very deliberate. But unusually, he put this stained glass window in between it, which has, 7 vertical stained glass windows, which you don't really get to appreciate from this angle. You have to go inside. And the problem is when you're inside, it's sort of hidden from view at the back of the cathedral. Everyone's focusing on all those other beautiful stained glass windows that I showed you, and they're missing out on a rather grand piece, which is Jesus and the apostles. And you have to go upstairs to a galley to get a view of this particular section. So I thought I would give you a glimpse of that as well before we head back into the cathedral itself. I'm going to try the music. I'm not very hopeful that you can hear it because I was going to play out. No, I can't hear it at all. Let's see if I can. Can you hear any music now? You can. I can't. But that doesn't matter as long as you can. So this is the choir of St. Macca's, and I included this because it includes organ as well in the cathedral. And I'm going to remain silent for a bit so you can listen to it. So there we are, my friends. Way over schedule. I apologize. But as I said at the beginning, I have a habit of getting carried away, and there's so much to show you as well. And hope you've got a feeling for what an incredible place Old Aberdeen is, and tempted you to find out a bit more. So thank you very much. I put the link on there, but I'm going to circulate it in. I hope that you may join me on future virtual Scotland tours. And the next one coming up, we're going to head out of the city. We're going to head into Aberdeenshire itself, where we have somewhere like 300 castles or remains of castles just in one region of Scotland. And there's so many castles, we actually have a castle trail. And I'm going to show you around some of those castles in part one of the Scotland Castle Trail. So that's coming up at the beginning of May. So we won't be leaving too far from Aberdeen. But if you joined up through Eventbrite or Ticket Tailor, there is a cut price option. If you become a patron, you get free as part of your subscription, which is £3 a month. You can cancel at any time. You get a ticket to each month's virtual Scotland tour, and you get lots of other things as well, which aren't on my Facebook page or website page. So you get an extra newsletter, extra blog things as well. A walk of the month, I think, is part of it as well. So you get some other interesting goodies that are not on offer elsewhere. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then so I can see you all. And I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to switch off